I have buried men in 3 theaters, and I have watched better Marines than me freeze in the half-second that decides everything. So understand that I do not say what I am about to say lightly. The best soldier I ever served beside was a quiet young woman we called the church mouse, and for 11 days I did not think she was worth the fuel it took to fly her out to us. I want to tell it the way it happened, mockery and all, because the mockery is the point. We did not earn the right to respect her. She earned it for us, and then she handed it over like it was nothing, and I have not stopped thinking about that since. She came in on the resupply bird on a Tuesday, in the flat gray light before the heat woke up, and I remember thinking the load looked light. Firebase Talon sat at the mouth of the Carson Valley, the way a chipped tooth sits in a jaw, all bad angles and dust that got into everything you owned, and we were a mixed element out there, my Marines, a scattering of Army signal and engineer types, and whatever the task force decided to bolt onto us that month. When the ramp came down and the rotor wash finally quit, 4 people walked off. 3 of them were replacement riflemen we'd been promised for a month. The 4th was her. She was small. That is the first thing, and I will not pretend it wasn't. Small and unhurried, with a plain field haircut and a face that gave you nothing, carrying her own kit in a way that didn't ask for help and didn't refuse it either. She had the sleeves of a Navy uniform under a plate carrier that had seen real use, and no unit flash I recognized, and she stood there in the dust while the bird lifted off behind her and did not squint against the grit the way the rest of us learned to only after months. She just took the valley in, the ridgelines, the wadi, the 2 roads in with a slow, flat sweep of her eyes, corner to corner, like she was counting exits in a room. I clocked that and dismissed it. I dismissed a lot that first week that I would give a year of my life to have back. Gunny, my radio man tours, was at my shoulder with the manifest. Navy sent us a raise, petty officer. Billet says he frowned at the paper, says attached individual augmentee. Doesn't say for what. Doesn't say for what, I repeated. That was the thing that soured me on her before she'd said 10 words. Everybody at Talon had a job. The engineers had the culverts and the wire. Signal had the birds and the encryption. My Marines had the valley and the men who wanted to kill us in it. An augmentee with no listed function, dropped on us with the ammo and the mail, was a mouth to feed and a body to account for when the shooting started. I'd asked for shooters. They sent me a clerk with quiet eyes. I made myself walk over. Rank has its manners even when you're annoyed. Petty officer raise, gunnery sergeant Whitfield, welcome to the garden spot. Gunny, she shook my hand. Dry grip, calloused across the palm and the first knuckles in a way I noted and again filed under nothing. Where do you want me? Where do I want you? Not what's my job, not who do I report to, not any of the throat-clearing a new arrival usually did to establish they mattered. Just point me at the work. I mistook it for meekness. Intel and admin are in the second connects, I said. You'll bunk with the medics. Chow's at 6, noon, and dusk, and we don't hold plates. I meant that last part as a small unkindness, and she took it as information, nodded once, and went to find her rack. I watched her walk the length of the compound and clock every crew-served position, every gap in the HESCO, the aid station, the fuel point, the 2 ways out, without once looking like she was doing it. And I thought, analyst. They've sent me an analyst who thinks she's an operator. God help us. By the 3rd day she had a name, and it wasn't the one on her uniform. It started at chow, the way these things do. She didn't drink the near beer the army guys smuggled, didn't play cards, didn't tell the stories that men tell to make the valley smaller. She ate fast and clean and quiet, and afterward she'd sit against the connects with a paperback so worn the cover was gone, or she'd field strip her rifle in the dark by feel, laying the parts on a cloth in a line only she understood. Somebody, I think it was Corporal Dellums, who was young and loud and good at exactly one thing, which was being young and loud, called her the church mouse. And it stuck the way a bad nickname always sticks, because it was cruel and it was easy, and it let everybody feel a little bigger for a second. Church mouse eats and prays, Dellums said loud enough the 4th night. Reads her little book. You lost, ma'am. Chapel's back at Bagram. She turned a page, didn't look up. "I'm not lost," she said, and there was nothing in it, no heat, no hurt, no invitation to keep going. It was the flattest, most complete sentence I ever heard, and Dellums, who wanted a rise, got nothing to push against, and so he laughed too loud and let it drop. I let it drop too. I was a gunnery sergeant of Marines, and a young woman was being needled in my chow line, and I told myself it was nothing. She could handle a little heat, and I turned back to my food. That is the kind of thing you tell yourself. It cost me nothing at the time. It cost me plenty later in the currency where it actually matters, which is knowing what you are. Here is what I saw that first week, and refused to read. I saw her run the perimeter every dawn, not the showy PT of a young Marine trying to be seen, but a slow, deliberate lap where she stopped at each fighting position and looked out along the fields of fire, testing the angles with her eyes, the way you check the locks in a house you didn't trust. I saw her at the ammo point, quietly correcting the way a private had staged the belted 240 rounds so they'd feed clean instead of catch. I saw her hands. Everybody's hands tell on them out there, soft hands, staff hands, or the wrecked knuckles and rope scar and trigger callus of somebody who'd spent a decade doing violence with their body. And hers told a story I'd have believed instantly on a man, and refused to believe on her. I saw her sleep in her boots with her rifle threaded through her arm, the way you only sleep after enough nights when sleeping any other way had almost killed you. And I saw her watch the ridgeline. She was always watching the ridgeline, the long knife edge to the north where the valley narrowed, the ground any competent enemy would use. And once, when a goat herd's dust plume came off that ridge at the wrong hour, she was on her feet and reading it before the tower even called it. And it was nothing, it was goats. And she sat back down and picked up her book, and I thought, jumpy little thing, and went back to my coffee. An analyst, a church mouse, a body to account for. I want you to sit with how completely I had her wrong, because I had every piece of the truth in front of me for a week, and I arranged them into the wrong picture out of nothing but the size of her and the branch on her sleeve. There is a lesson in that I'm still paying tuition on. The range refresher was on the 6th day, and that was where Dellums finally reached too far. We ran a live fire refit every couple weeks, nothing fancy. A cleared stretch of waddy with pop-up steel and some barricades, a way to knock the rust off and let the new riflemen embarrass themselves in front of God before they did it in front of the enemy. I ran it hard because it was the one thing out there I could control. Rays came down to the line with the rest, Quiet and Dellums, who'd shot expert twice and never let anybody forget it, decided the church mouse was going to be his morning's entertainment. "You even quowed, ma'am," he said, grinning, playing to the line. "Navy zeros at what, 7 yards? Want me to walk you through the safety?" Some of the Army guys laughed. A couple of my Marines did too, and I let them, and that's on me. Rays drew her rifle up, checked her chamber, and said, "I'm good, Corporal." Flat, always flat. "Just saying." Dellum spread his hands. "Barricade tables kind of a lot. Multiple positions, transitions, malfunctions on the clock. Not really a not really a chapel drill." She looked at him then, and it was the first time I'd seen her actually look at a man like she was measuring him, and it lasted about a second and a half, and whatever she measured she filed away without a word. "Show me the sequence," she said. I ran her the barricade table myself, because I wanted to see it too, God forgive me. I was curious the way a crowd is curious. 6 positions, strong side and support side, a forced reload, a induced malfunction on the 3rd barricade, steel out to 300, all of it on a shot timer. It's a table that eats good young Marines alive, because it punishes anybody who's fast without being smooth. I expected the church mouse to fumble it, and I expected to feel a little bad and a little vindicated at the same time, which is an ugly thing to expect, and I expected it anyway. She stepped to the line. She did not roll her shoulders or bounce or do any of the things men do to spend their nerves. She got still. Then the timer went, and the stillness came apart into something I did not have a word for that morning and have a word for now. She was economical. That's the closest I can get. Every movement went exactly as far as it needed to and stopped. She flowed from the barricade to the kneeling to the support side around the low wall without a wasted inch. Her reload happened somewhere I didn't even see because my eye was still on the last target when the fresh magazine was already seated. And when the induced malfunction came, a dead trigger on a round we'd staged to fail, she cleared it so fast and so flat, tap rack back on target, that Dellums, standing next to me, actually said, "Huh," out loud like the wind had knocked it out of him. The steel fell in a rhythm, not fast loud fast the way the young guns did it, spraying to beat the clock. Even, certain. 300 meters support side off a barricade on a timer, and she put them down like she was setting cups on a shelf. The last plate rang and she came off the trigger and made her weapon safe and stepped back off the line, and the wadi was dead quiet except for the wind. Dellums looked at the timer, looked at the steel, looked at her, his mouth worked. "Lucky table," he said, and it came out small. "Sure," Reyes said, and picked up her brass. I should have known then. A part of me did know, the part that had watched her hands and her sleep and her eyes on the ridge, and that part was standing up and shouting while the loud, dumb front of my brain told it to sit down. Because here is the thing I understood only later. What I'd watched wasn't a good shooter. Good shooters I'd made by the dozen. What I'd watched was a shooter who had run that exact drill, or something worse than it, so many thousands of times, under so much more pressure than a wadi range, that her body had stopped needing her mind to do it. That kind of smoothness isn't a gift. It's a bill, paid in years, in a place that costs more than most people have. I'd seen it exactly twice before in my career, both times on men whose names I wasn't cleared to know, and I looked right at it on that quiet girl and told myself, "Lucky table," and walked back up the wadi to my coffee. 2 days later the valley brief came down, and I put her in the back of the room and talked over her. And 40 hours after that the church mouse pulled 11 of my Marines out of a kill zone that should have taken all of us. But I'm getting ahead. Let me tell the brief, because the brief is where I made my last free mistake. The last time I dismissed her when dismissing her didn't yet have a body count attached. The tasking was a road clearance and presence patrol up the Carson to a village called Day Sarak, 3 vehicles, a reinforced squad plus attachments, out and back in daylight. Routine, in the way that word lies to you out there. I ran the brief in the Ops Connects, route, actions on, medevac plan, the usual, with the squad crowded in and the map up on the plywood. Ray stood at the back, quiet, and when I got to the route, I laid out the northern road along the base of that knife-edge ridge, because it was faster, and the southern track was washed out at the second wadi. "Gunny," her voice flat from the back, first time she'd spoken in a brief. "We're moving, Rays. The northern road puts you under the ridge for 400 meters with no shoulder and one way off it," she said, not arguing, reporting the way she'd reported the church wasn't far and the range was fine. If it were me, I'd take the south track and eat the wadi. The high ground owns that road. Corporal Dellum snorted. Somebody said the church mouse has thoughts. I felt the room want to laugh and I let it, and worse, I used it. "Noted," I said in the tone that means the opposite. "We're not adding an hour to eat a washout on a maybe. North Road. Actions on if we take contact under the ridge, push through to the far side, it's the only cover for a click." And I moved on, and she nodded once and said nothing else. And I saw her look at that ridge on the map, the way she looked at it every dawn from the wire. And I called the brief and sent everybody to stage. The high ground owns that road. She'd said it in 11 words flat, and I'd let a corporal laugh it into the dirt. We rolled at first light. By 9 o'clock the enemy proved her right with everything they had. We rolled at first light with the sun still low behind us, 3 vehicles nose to tail, Rays in the rear truck because that's where you put the body you don't have a job for. I rode lead. The northern road was exactly what she'd said it was, a hard-packed track pinned between the base of that knife-edge ridge on our left and a drop into the wadi on our right. No shoulder, no cover. The high ground looming over us the whole way like a held breath. I remember the quiet. Out there the quiet is never good, and I knew it. And I pushed us on anyway because I'd committed in front of the squad, and a gunnery sergeant who reverses himself in front of his Marines over the church mouse's misgivings is a gunnery sergeant they stopped trusting. That's the story I told myself. It's a story that got a man killed. The lead truck cleared the narrows. The second truck was midway through when the ridge came apart. It didn't sound like the movies. It sounded like the whole world clearing its throat at once, the flat concussion of an RPG off the high ground, then the ripping stutter of a heavy machine gun keyed on the second truck, then more of it, a lot more, walking down the column from 3 positions on the ridge that had been dug in and waiting God knew how long. The second truck slewed and stopped dead with its engine block torn open, right in the fattest part of the kill zone, and the men in it were pinned under fire with the wadi at their backs and 400 meters of open road to anywhere. The lead truck, mine, was through the worst of it. The rear truck, Raises, was back before the narrows, out of the direct beaten zone. And the middle, the stopped one, with a rifle team plus my corpsman and Delhams's fire team crammed in the back, sat in the open and took the weight of everything the ridge had. I've been in ambushes before. There is a moment, 1 or 2 seconds long, where every man in the kill zone is nothing but an animal, and the ones who live are the ones who get their humanity back fastest and start doing the drills. I was screaming into the net and trying to get my lead truck turned to put fire on the ridge, and it was chaos, and in the middle of that chaos on the squad freak, I heard a voice that was not screaming. All stations, this is Raise, flat, level. The exact tone she'd used to tell Delham she wasn't lost. The volume's coming off 3 positions, high on the ridge north to south dug in. The stopped vehicle is in the beaten zone and can't stay there. I'm dismounting to the wadi side to work the casualties and get eyes on the near gun. Lead element, get me suppression on the northernmost position, that's the one with the plunging fire into the truck. Break. A pause, half a second. I've got the casualties. Nobody freeze up on me. And then she was out of the rear truck and moving, and I saw the first thing that started taking my whole picture of her apart. She didn't run bent over and panic the way instinct screams at you to. She moved in short, fast, deliberate bounds along the wadi lip on the low side of the road, using the 3 feet of dead ground the enemy on the ridge couldn't depress their guns into. And she read that dead ground on the move, at a dead sprint, like she'd walked it 100 times. Every bound ended behind something, a fold, a rock, the burning hulk of the second truck, and between bounds she was low and the rounds that came for her cracked over empty air where she'd been a half second before. I have trained that movement into Marines for 20 years and watched most of them get it wrong under fire. She did it like walking. She crossed 60 meters of a live kill zone to get to the stopped truck, and she got there. And the church mouse I'd been feeding for a week knelt down in the open, next to a screaming 19-year-old with his leg opened up, and went to work with her hands as steady as if she were field stripping her rifle in the dark. That was when I stopped narrating my own doubts and started doing my job, because she told me to. And something in the flat certainty of her voice made 20 years of Marine in me answer, a Navy petty officer's call without thinking. I got fire onto the northern position. My gunner walked the .50 up the ridge and found the dug-in gun and hammered it, and the plunging fire into the stopped truck slackened, and in that slack I heard Raise again, still level, calling the wounded off the truck one at a time, telling each man exactly where to move and when, threading them back along the same dead ground she'd used, and it was working. The pinned men were moving. Under 3 guns on high ground, in the open, they were moving, because one small voice in the middle of them refused to come apart and told them, in order, what to do with their hands and their feet. But the near gun, the one lowest on the ridge, the one enfilading the road so nothing could move up or down it, was in a fold we couldn't reach with fire from where I was, and it was going to chew the wounded to pieces the second they tried to cross the last open stretch to real cover. I could see it. Reyes could see it, and I heard her key the net one more time. "Lead, your 50 can't make the near gun, it's deflated from your angle. I can flank it from the wadi. I need 60 seconds of everything you've got on the top 2 positions to fix them so they can't watch me move. On my mark, a beat. Anybody got a problem taking direction from me, save it for the debrief." Nobody had a problem. Dellums, who'd called her the church mouse, was on the far side of the stopped truck with his rifle up, and I heard him key his own radio and say, in a voice I'd never heard out of him, "Copy, Reyes, go. We've got the top." The corporal who'd offered to walk her through the safety was now taking a fire control order from her and calling her by name like it was the most natural thing in the world, because it was. Under fire, the truth is very simple. The person who is competent is in charge, and everyone knows it in their spine, and rank and branch and a cruel little nickname burn off like morning fog. She said, "Mark," and we opened up on the top of the ridge, and she went into the wadi and disappeared. Here is what I could not see and what the survivors and the after-action pieced together for me later, and what one man who arrived at the end confirmed in a way that took the ground out from under me. She dropped into the wadi and moved north along it, below the enemy's line of sight, fast and quiet, past the stopped truck, past the beaten zone, up toward the fold where the near gun sat. She came up out of the wadi behind and below that gun, alone, and she cleared it. 2 men on the gun, another 2 in the fighting position with them, and she took the position at close range with her rifle in a sequence the one surviving enemy, captured after, gut-shot and talking, described through a translator as, and I am quoting the interpreter's words because they've stayed with me, like a door closing. No spray. No wild burst. Aimed shots, transitions, movement. The position cleared in seconds by a single operator who had done exactly that specific thing more times than the 4 men in that hole had collectively fired their weapons in anger. The near gun went silent. The enfilade died, and the last stretch of road opened up, and the wounded crossed it and lived. She did not radio anything triumphant. What she said when the near gun quit was, "Near gun's down. Move the casualties now, you've got a clean lane for maybe 40 seconds. Go." And they went, and I put my truck across the mouth of the Narrows to shield the crossing, and 40 seconds later every living man from the stopped vehicle was behind hard cover, and the corpsman and the church mouse were working the wounded in the lee of my truck, while the top 2 positions on the ridge, leaderless now with their base of fire gone, broke and tried to run and got caught in the open by the .50. We lost 1 man that day. Lance Corporal Petey Vance, 20 years old, killed in the first 3 seconds by the opening RPG before anyone did anything right or wrong, before Reyes was even out of her truck, before any decision I made or didn't make could have touched it. I have told myself that 1,000 times, and it is true, and it does not help. What I know, what the 11 men who walked out of that kill zone know, is that without the small, quiet woman I'd fed for a week and never once bothered to understand, we would have buried a squad, not a man. She was the reason there were 11 to walk out at all, and I had put her in the back truck because I didn't have a job for her. I want to tell you about the ridge going quiet, and the QRF, and the count, because that's where I finally learned what she was, and it wasn't from her. She never told me. In 11 days and 1 firefight, she never once told me a single thing about herself. I had to be told by a man who outranked us both, in a way that turned the whole valley silent. When the shooting stopped, the silence came down like a lid. That specific ringing quiet after contact, where your ears are shot and your hands start to shake now that they're allowed to, and the dust drifts, and you go around touching your men to count them and make sure they're real. I found Reyes in the lee of my truck with blood to her elbows that wasn't hers, both hands pressed into the corpsman's work on the kid with the opened leg, keeping pressure while Doc tied it off, talking to the boy low and steady the same flat way she talked about everything. "You're fine, you're going to keep the leg. Look at me, breathe." and the kid was looking at her like she'd come down off the ridge on wings. When Doc took over, she sat back on her heels, wiped her hands on her trousers, and picked her rifle back up and reloaded it, and went back to watching the ridgeline. Same as every dawn at the wire, like nothing at all had happened, like she hadn't just crossed a kill zone twice and cleared a machine gun nest by herself. Dellums came and stood near her. He didn't say anything for a while. Then he said, quiet, not performing for anyone now, "Raise, that thing you did, going for the near gun." He stopped. "I've never seen anybody move like that." She checked her chamber. "You did fine on the top guns, Corporal," she said. "You kept them fixed. That's why it worked." And that was all. She gave him the credit for fixing the gun so she could do the impossible thing, and she meant it, and Dellum stood there holding a piece of respect he hadn't earned and had been handed anyway, and I watched his face do something complicated. The church mouse. He'd have taken a beating gladly rather than have her be that gracious to him. I know because I felt the exact same thing, standing 10 feet away, and I outranked him and should have known better a week sooner. I still didn't know what she was. I knew she was the best I'd seen. I didn't yet know the word for it. The word came off a helicopter an hour later. The QRF came in low and fast from the direction of Talon, 2 birds, and the moment the ramps dropped I knew the day had gotten the task force's full attention, because the men who came off weren't a standard react force. They moved like Rays moved. Same economy, same flat calm, same way of clearing a piece of ground with their eyes before their boots touched it. They set a perimeter without being told and swept the ridge and started collecting what the enemy had left behind. And their leader, a broad, weathered man with a Master Chief's anchors and no name tape I could read from where I stood, came down off the second bird and took one long look at the kill zone, the stopped truck, the dead on the ridge, the 11 living men. And then he saw the small woman kneeling by my truck cleaning blood off her hands, and everything about him changed. He stopped walking. I saw it. A senior chief with 20 years of doing violence in bad places, a man who did not stop for anything, stopped dead in the dust and looked at her the way you look at somebody you were told was somewhere else, somebody whose name you'd heard spoken in rooms you weren't cleared for. "Saint," he said, not loud, it carried anyway. Rays looked up. Something crossed her face, not surprise exactly, recognition, and something underneath it that might have been the closest thing to weariness I ever saw on her. "Master Chief," she said. He crossed the ground to her, and he did not offer his hand to shake. He came to a halt in front of her, and this hard old operator, in front of my Marines and his own men and the leaderless dead on the ridge, brought himself up and rendered her a salute, sharp, full, correct, and held it. Held it until she got to her feet and returned it. And then he dropped his hand and said, in a voice pitched to carry to every man in that kill zone, because he wanted us to hear it. Because he'd clearly guessed exactly what we'd been. "Gunny, you've been living with a legend, and I'd bet my anchors you didn't know it." He didn't take his eyes off her. "Petty Officer First Class Rays, call sign Saint. She's one of ours, direct action, the real thing, not the kind they make posters about. 3 deployments you'll never read about. She's the reason a package of 40 people came home out of a place I'm not going to name in front of a crowd, and she did it with a broken hand, and she has a silver star and 2 bronze with Combat V in a drawer somewhere that she has never once mentioned to a living soul because that is not what she is." He finally looked at me. "She got individual augmentee orders to a fire base as a rest rotation, a quiet posting, to get her off the line for 90 days before somebody made her go back out." His jaw worked. "You put her in the admin connects." The silence in that kill zone was the loudest thing I have ever heard. I have run through 100 things I could have said, and there was nothing to say. The corpsman was starring. Dellums had gone white. And every dismissal, every church mouse, every laugh I'd allowed at that chow line, every time I'd talked over her flat, quiet voice, came back and stood up in me at once, and I understood with a completeness that I have never gotten free of that I had spent 11 days being small in front of somebody who was, by every measure that matters out there, worth a company of me. Ray's didn't gloat. Of course she didn't. She looked, if anything, uncomfortable, not at the danger which hadn't touched her, but at the words, at the citation being spoken aloud, at 40 men learning the thing she'd spent a career making sure nobody learned. When the Master Chief finished, she said, quietly, "Master Chief, there's a captured hostile in the fold north of the near gut wound. He'll talk if your corpsman can keep him alive. And Lance Corporal Vance needs to go home first. Everything else can wait." Turning it even then away from herself and onto the work and the dead. He looked at her another second, and something in his hard face went gentle, and he said, "I, Saint," and turned and made it happen. They flew P.D. Vance out first under a flag, because she'd said so, and because the Master Chief agreed, and because by then nobody in that valley was going to argue with either of them. And I stood there in the settling dust, a gunnery sergeant of Marines, and watched my church mouse walk the line of my wounded one more time, checking dressings, saying the flat, steady things that had kept men alive, and I did not have the first idea how to look at her. I found out that night, in the mess, what respect looks like when men are ashamed of themselves. She came in late, quiet as ever, and got her plate. We still didn't hold plates, and I have never in my life been so ashamed of a small unkindness. And she went to sit against the connects the way she always did, alone, with the paperback with no cover. And Corporal Dellum stood up. He didn't say anything. He just stood at his table, plate forgotten, and came to a kind of attention. And then the private next to him stood. And then the fire team. And then the rest of the squad that had been in that kill zone. And then the Army signal guys who'd only heard the story secondhand. And then men who hadn't even been on the patrol, until the whole mess hall was on its feet in a silence that had nothing performative in it at all, 30-odd hard men standing up in a plywood chow hall for a small woman with a plate of food and a ruined paperback. Because it was the only thing any of them could think of to do with what they were feeling. Nobody had ordered it. Nobody said a word. Ray stopped. She looked at the room full of standing men. And for the first time in 11 days I saw her genuinely at a loss, not afraid. Saint was never afraid, but undone by this in a way no ridge full of guns could have undone her. And she did the thing I will remember longest of all the things I remember about her. She didn't tell them to sit. She didn't say it was nothing. She set her plate down on the nearest table, and she came to attention herself, and she rendered them a salute, the whole room. Every man who doubted her and every man who hadn't, and held it. And her voice when she finally spoke was as flat and level and certain as it had been in the kill zone, and it broke every one of us clean in half. "For Vance," she said. "Not for me. Not for the shot or the flank or the record in the drawer she'd never mentioned. For the 20-year-old we'd lost in the first 3 seconds, the one man she couldn't save because no one could have." She turned the whole room's respect, the standing and the shame and the salute, away from herself and laid it on the boy in the flag-draped bag. And she held her salute until every one of us understood that this was the only version of honor she'd accept, the kind that remembers the dead before it praises the living. I got the room seated. I don't remember how. And later, when it was dark and the base had gone quiet and she was back at the wire watching the ridgeline the way she did every night of her life, I went and stood near her, and for a long time I didn't say anything either, because there was nothing I could say that wasn't smaller than what I owed. Finally I said, "I put you in the back truck." "You did," she said, flat. "No mercy in it and no cruelty either, just true. I called you, I couldn't finish it." "I know what you called me, Gunny." She kept watching the ridge. "It doesn't matter what men decide I am before the shooting. It only matters what I do when it starts." She was quiet a moment. "You got your fire onto the north gun fast when I asked. Faster than most. That's why the crossing worked." And there it was again. She'd found the one thing I'd done right in 11 days and handed it to me, the same way she'd handed Dellums the top guns, because that was the shape of her, all the way down. She gave the credit away and kept the dead. She rotated out 4 days later on the same kind of gray light bird she'd come in on, carrying her own kit, and the whole element came to see her off, which we had done for exactly no one else all year. She shook my hand, dry grip, calloused palm, the hands I should have read the first morning, and said, "Take the south track next time, Gunny. The high ground owns that road." And she got on the bird, and it lifted, and she was gone, and I have not seen her since. I've told this story more times than I can count, to young Marines who need to hear it and to old ones who already know. I always tell the mockery first, the church mouse, the chow line, the laugh I allowed, the back truck, because if I only told you the flank and the salute you'd think it was a story about a hero, and it isn't. It's a story about the rest of us, about how completely you can look at the truth and refuse to see it because it comes in a shape you decided didn't count. She was the finest soldier I ever served beside, and I had every piece of proof in my hands for a week and arranged them into a joke. The valley cured me of that. She cured me of that, and never raised her voice to do it, and gave the credit away when she was done. The best soldier I ever knew was a quiet young woman we called the church mouse, until the day the ridge came apart and she walked across a kill zone twice to bring my men home. Her name was Raise. Her call sign was Saint. And the last thing she ever said to me was a warning about the ground, delivered flat and certain and free of any grudge, by someone who had already forgiven me for a thing I have never once managed to forgive myself. The high ground owns that road. I take the south track now, every time.